This next one was submitted by Muhammad from Minneapolis. And who in Minneapolis is not named Muhammad, right? I always give out the first name in the city. I don't do the last names, but even if I did last names, I would have great difficulty pronouncing this one. Muhammad writes to me, what proof do you have that Islam is inherently violent? What right do you have to defame Prophet Muhammad, PBUH? Well, Muhammad, to be clear, I'm not defaming you. I'm sure the listener knows that. I'm not defaming anyone. I simply observe something. So if you robbed a bank, you literally in history robbed a bank, and I said, Muhammad robbed a bank, you could say, how dare you defame me? Because defaming someone means you're making up something about them that's not true in order to injure their reputation. See, I'm not inventing something to say about Muhammad. I'm observing the historical record of Muhammad. So no attempt is being made to defame your quote-unquote prophet. But in terms of what proof do you have that Islam is violent, I'll tell you this. The greatest book that exists about Islam, jihad, terrorism, etc. is actually Manhattan Massacre, written by me. Initial research began in 1997. Primary, raw, hard research began in 1999. The pencil hit the notepad in the summer of the year 2000. 2001, the book takes organizational form. Late in 2001, they finally hit us, and I have to make a few changes to the tenses of the verbs. Instead of future tense, or instead of future tense, looking forward to something that's coming, I now have to look backwards on the one that actually came and include a few other things. So this book came out finally. I submitted it in early 2002, and the printing press didn't put it out until early February of 2003. Keep in mind, I was in my early 20s, and I don't know who opened their fat mouth. The scriptures say that a bird of the heavens will take your secret. The phrase, a little birdie told me. I literally only told 2 people, maybe 3, and I would consider all of these people inner circle, that I'm working on a sequel to and update of Manhattan Massacre that I'm going to put out at some point. I don't know how it got out into the public square to where people are talking about it, but I don't even lie anymore and pretend that I'm not working on it, because too many people from too many different sides of town who don't even know each other ask me, when's the Manhattan Massacre sequel coming out? It used to be, I don't know what you're talking about, but now it's like, fine. I'm working on it as we speak. But there's 3 other projects in line in front of it. So it should be out, hopefully, by 2021 for the 20th anniversary of the attack. But in terms of proof, if you want the book of full mention on Islam, jihad, terrorism, etc., you simply need to go to Manhattan Massacre. And yes, it's crude. Yes, it's rough. Yes, I wrote it in my early 20s. And I was paranoid because I didn't want anyone to steal my research. So I never put it in front of a third party to edit. So some editing mistakes made it through to the final product. I was afraid someone would see my research, steal my research, and publish it as their own. So I trusted nobody to edit the thing, and the final product paid a small price for that in terms of polish. But content, no Islamic leader, imam, mullah, etc. in Minneapolis, Chicago, Milwaukee, Gary, Detroit, anywhere in this part of the country or other parts of the country has come forward to say, what you've written is factually inaccurate. Nobody says that to me. Some of them challenge my right to say it, as you have here. But in terms of, like, this is inaccurate, it's not in the Quran, not one person's been dumb enough to do it. But I got the book in my hand, just, I'll flip somewhere random. It's so jam-packed full of facts. Here we go. Surah 8, there's two verses, verse 12 and verse 17, where I expound on them. If these are not documentation that Islam is violent, then nothing is, okay? It says right here, Allah wants to terrorize non-Muslims into conversion, so Muslims are to stab us in the throat and chop off our fingers. Surah 8, verse 12, I shall cast into the unbelievers' hearts terror, so smite above the necks and smite every finger of them, close quote. That's the Religion of Peace's sacred text. And contextually, this is the God of Islam speaking. This is the word of Al-Ilah, the pagan moon deity of Muhammad's Quraysh tribe. And he's speaking unbelievers, as he's using the phrase there. It's referring in the context to non-Muslims. So in a piece of Islamic literature, when you're discussing non-believers, you're discussing non-Muslims. Allah wants to instill terror into the hearts of non-Muslims. And by what method does he want to do that? How does he want to terrorize us? How does he want to scare us? And when I say us, I mean non-Muslims. So the question becomes, are you a Muslim? Because if not, then you need to pay attention. Those who are Muslims and who read this verse are being trained, they're being instructed as to how to deal with you and your family and anyone that you know who you care about that's not a Muslim. This is what Allah wants done to the non-Muslim in this passage, unless either Muhammad wrongly spoke it to the scribes, or unless the scribes wrongly recorded what he was trying to say. You got this big game of telephone. You got Allah speaking to Jibril, Jibril speaking to Muhammad, Muhammad speaking to the scribes putting it down onto papyrus. Okay, so it's this big game of telephone. And yes, it produced a big garbled mess. But whether you want to debate it or whatever, the one thing you cannot debate is the verse is there and it exists and it reads just like that. Allah wants his human followers, the Muslims, to smite us, okay? He's even specified that we're to be hit with the sword right above the neck, very surgical. This is a reference, no doubt, to going for the throat, going for the jugular vein, no matter which of the two, whether it's the throat or the jugular vein. It's still quite the violent picture being painted. There's no Bible verse in the book of Romans, Ephesians, etc., where the Christians being instructed, hey, you want to advance Christianity? Just smite the non-Christians above the throat. You know what I mean? That verse doesn't exist. No historical account of Jesus Christ taking up a sword saying, I'm going to advance my kingdom. That doesn't exist because it didn't happen. Muslims are, through this passage, being commanded to chop off our fingers. Wasn't bad enough that you go for the throat. Now you got to chop off our fingers too, you see. And if you think about Islamic countries where the government uses Islamic principles, Sahih al-Bukhari, al-Muslim, etc., as their law of the land. So instead of separation of church and state, you have separation of mosque and state, but they don't have that. They have mosque and state being one and the same. They use Islam and its teachings as the law of the land instead of, say, a constitution or something of that nature. But these verses are used, they're carried out exactly down to the very body parts that you could have cut off if you're sentenced accordingly. Now, the Muslim will defend themselves and say, we only do this to criminals. But it's worth noting that in these very same countries, a citizen is prosecuted as a criminal if you believe in, if you practice something other than Islam. So when they say, yeah, we only chop the fingers off of people who deserve it, their definition of who deserves it is you if you're not a Muslim. Now, people who are not in the government, but are seeking to follow Islam the way that the author of this surah intended to be understood, and other verses like it, if they failed to slit your throat, chop off your fingers, they would cease to being Muslims in the right sense of the word. So you say, well, Ahmed from the corner makes my falafel, makes my Slurpee, or whatever, and he's a good man, and I know he's a family man. I know he would never do this. A, he's not numerically the majority, so he can't do it yet. He doesn't have the power behind him. But B, if Allah says to do X and you say, I would never do X, then you don't believe these verses, which calls into question whether or not you're a Muslim at all. So the existence of, I know plenty of Muslims who are good people who would never do this. All I can say is, you know, plenty of Muslims who either don't believe the Quran to be true or who believe it but cannot come out of the closet yet because the conditions don't exist where the fangs and the sheepskin can fully come off yet. The average citizen who follows Islam has no ability to bring someone up on charges in a courtroom sense and have a trial because they don't work in the government. They still find ways to carry out the principles and the spirit of this verse. Now, some branches of Islam don't want you to view this verse as literal. They want to be used of Allah to instill terror, instill fear into the hearts of non-Muslims, but they'll do it by any means necessary. So it might not be a literal chopping off of the fingers. It might not be a literal slitting of the throat or smiting above the neck. It might be something a little different, like, I don't know, crashing airplanes into skyscrapers or blowing up government buildings or blowing up planes. Some Muslims think that blowing up of a skyscraper is actually better because instead of slitting one throat or chopping off one person's fingers, you can hit hundreds and even thousands of people in one shot. So while Muslims are not unified necessarily in how they kill the unbeliever, what they are unified in is the belief that they must. It's in the Quran. You can't get around it. You look at the commentaries that exist, which help you try to get the meaning out of the text. You can't get around it either. The text translation and commentary of the Quran by Abdullah Yusuf Ali, footnote number 1189 or 1189 on page 418, seeking to give us a Muslim interpretation of Surah 8:12 says, quote, the vulnerable parts of an armed man are above the neck. A blow on the neck, face, or head finishes him off. If he has armor, it is difficult to get at his heart. But if his hands are put out of action, he's unable to wield his sword or lance or other weapon and easily becomes a prisoner, close quote. This is a Muslim scholastic work. This is an academic work, okay? Now, you can argue with me. Brian's being difficult. But are you willing to argue with Abdullah Yusuf Ali, the most popular Quranic commentator that's being read by American Muslims today? Ali's just like me. He holds to my position on the verse. It's just that him saying it doesn't upset people. The principles described being the words of Allah are physical combat. So there's not a spiritual battle. There's not an inward battle like a liberal Muslim or a Muslim who's trying to deceive you about what they believe is going to say. The principles communicated in the Quranic verse that we just read, Surah 8:12, not just for one sect of Islam, you see. They're for all Muslims. They are to be applied by all Muslims, all time periods, all countries, all cultures, all locations. And yes, that includes 21st century America. That is a divine command. And then my next subheading is Allah is a murderer and his Muslims are the weapons through which he kills. So Allah views himself as the one who's taking out the non-Muslim. But the Muslim that you ride the bus with every day or whatever, Allah literally views him or her as the murder weapon. Surah 8, since we're already in Surah 8, verse 17 says, quote, you did not slay them, but Allah slew them, close quote. So back in the previous verse, verse 12, you saw Allah wanted to put terror into the hearts of non-Muslims via his human instruments, through his Muslims, his believers. He wanted to achieve this terror and this horror by instructing them to smite the non-Muslims above their necks, slit their throats, chop off their fingers. If you're a non-Muslim, the Muslims being trained to chop off your fingers. But later on in that same surah here, we see the ideas being developed further a few sentences later, and it gets uglier. Here in verse 17, even though the Muslims are the ones who are committing the acts of homicide, the one who's actually killing them is Allah himself, you see. And I don't care who you are, you have to know. At some point, the light has to go on. Forget about the white, liberal, angry, short-haired, hyphenated last name lady who tried to instruct you. Islam's a religion of peace. What does their book say? If you were reading Mein Kampf and you saw, kill all the Jews and kill all the non-Aryan races, would you say, this is really a figure of speech, you see. Nazism is a misunderstood worldview. You know, those are just fanatics who have twisted the words of Hitler to mean something else. No, it's in print, dummy. Why would you pretend it's not there, dummy? Because you have a suicidal mentality? Because you want to die? You want your neighbor to die? You want your neighbor to not know what the heck's happening? It's like you're playing pretend. You're living in a fake world, pretending these verses are not there. Allah wants to force people to submit to him. He wants to force you to accept Islam, and he has instructed Muslims to kill any who will not. His followers, the Muslims, are the chosen vessels through whom he wants to accomplish this horror and this murder. Allah is the almighty puppeteer, and the Muslims are the puppets that he guides to carry out his will in this sick puppet show called human history, on the stage called the earth. When he guides one of his puppets, one of his Muslims, to act out what he's trying to actually achieve, he's let us know that it's not the Muslim puppet that's responsible for the carnage, for the bloodshed. It's Al-Ilah, the puppet master himself, who's the real murderer behind the scenes. And the funny thing is, television, radio, Hollywood, the secular universities, the government-run public schools defend and try to prop this up. You continue on in the 8th surah, you hit verse 38. Convert or we will kill you, rob your dead body, and then use the money in your pockets to fund the advancement of Islam. Surah 8 verse 38 reads like this, quote, say to the unbelievers, if they give over, he will forgive them what is past. But if they return, the wont of the ancients is already gone. Close quote. So breaking the passage down, say to the unbelievers, and in the context, unbelievers are non-Muslims. Muslims who are studying this verse are being instructed as to what to say to you, the non-Muslim. Quote, if they give over, he will forgive them what is past. If the non-Muslim will convert to Islam, Allah will forgive them for all of the time in the preceding years of their life where they weren't a Muslim. But if they return, that is, if they turn away from the offer of Islam, if they reject it, the wont of the ancients is already gone. In other words, the same things should be done to them that have been done to rejectors of Islam in centuries past. Next verse, verse 39. Fight them till there's no persecution, and the religion is Allah's entirely. If they give over, surely Allah sees the things they do. Close quote. So we're just working our way through Surah 8 here. It's just some of the highlights. Now, fight literally means kill. Kill them, the non-Muslims, till there's no persecution or competing religious worldviews. Muslim countries see the spreading of the advancement of any philosophy other than Islamic throughout their country as a kind of persecution against Islam. How dare you allow this thing to spread? You're persecuting the religion of Allah, you see. So fight them till there's no competing worldviews. And the religion is Allah's entirely. So until Islam is the dominant religion across the entire land with no competing theories to even be entertained. Then if they give over, that is if they convert to Islam by submitting to the pagan moon idol, Al-Ilah, I would call him Satan, surely Allah sees the things they do, i.e. surely he's going to reward them for coming over to the truth. So if you receive an answer in the negative and a person you're proselytizing will not convert to Islam, you have to kill that person. But the kickers, after that person's dead, you have to go through that person's pockets to see if they had any money on them at the time they died. And if so, you have to take that money from him or her, and you have to use that money to continue on the path of blood and guts to convert the entire world to Islam. Surah 8, just a little bit down, verse 41. Know that whatever booty you take, the fifth of it is Allah's and the messenger's, close quote. So 1/5 of the spoils when you kill people and take the money off their dead bodies, a fifth of that is supposed to go to the messenger. And because this was something that Muhammad was speaking about and doing while he was alive, the context is when the Muslims slit throats and kill people and rob their money, it has to go to Muhammad. Today it would be applicable to whoever's leading the assault. So how do you think the early Muslims financed themselves? You know, this is before they had discovered any oil in that part of the world. Islam was built on blood. They robbed, they looted whoever they could, whoever would not become a Muslim. And they took their money, and that's how they financed the next war and the next war, and it just grew like a domino effect. So does the Quran leave room open for this to be practiced in today's world? In other words, the argument would be, well, they did that a long time ago, but now it's not like that anymore. Well, let's look at, once again, Abdullah Yusuf Ali. His footnote number 1209 or 1209 on page 425 of the Quran, text, translation, and commentary. It says, quote, the rule is that a fifth share is set apart for the imam, parentheses, it says the commander, and the rest is divided among the forces. So since there's not a prophet Muhammad to give 1/5, that's 20%. That's a tithe and that's 2 tithes. Okay. Instead, you have to give 1/5 or 20% to whoever is leading your band of assassins on the killing spree, your band of robbers. So if I got 10 Muslims together and we killed some people and robbed them, they have to give me 20% of whatever they steal off the dead bodies. But Abdullah Yusuf Ali, when he's describing the interpretation of this, his verbs are present tense. He uses that thing as is, okay, present tense. So this act of killing those who will not convert and then robbing their dead body after you kill them in order to see what money they had on and using that money to finance the spread of Islam, it's not some remote, ancient teaching and practice that has vanished from the planet. It has application today, and a Muslim seeking to obey the Quran has to do it today. All right? Continuing right on in Surah 8. Just going to do one more verse, and then I think that this will more than prove my point to Brother Muhammad from Minneapolis. So once you're well prepared to carry it out, then you have to go ahead in the name of Allah, and again, terrorize any and all non-Muslims. So this 8th surah is violent as all hell. Surah 8, verse 60, quote, make ready for them whatever force and strings of horses you can, to terrify thereby the enemy of Allah and your enemy, and others besides them that know not. Allah knows them, and whatsoever you expend in the way of Allah shall be repaid to you in full. You will not be wronged, close quote. So make ready for them, and again, them in an Islamic writing, you're dealing with non-Muslims. Okay, this is the context of the surah. Whatever force, so make ready for them whatever force that is any weapon, anything that can be used as a weapon against the non-Muslim, gather it up, get it ready. Airplanes are not excluded in this verse, even though there was no airplanes in the time of Muhammad. It's left open for airplanes and God knows what else worse. The idea is prepare whatever you can get that can be used as a weapon and be ready to use it going out for the great cause of advancing Islam, and strings of horses that you can. So when this was originally quote-unquote revealed, and even today in some Muslim countries, horses, camels, other animals are used as transportation. Today it could be applied, the principle involved could be applied to cars, vehicles, tanks, whatever. The idea is get these things ready along with weapons and be ready to use it. Transportation. So get your weapons ready, get your transportation ready to terrify thereby the enemy of Allah. And enemy of Allah, you have to know that's a non-Muslim. So I can say from life experience that I've been called an enemy of Allah myself by more than one Muslim from more than one different country because I was not willing to renounce Christianity and become a Muslim. There was an internet website in the 1990s where enemy of Allah was my nickname, and Muslims all called me the enemy of Allah, which I wore that with pride. I'm happy to be called an enemy of Allah because I am. So, and your enemy. So make ready for them whatever force, strings of horses to terrify thereby the enemy of Allah and your enemy. So any enemy of Allah's is supposed to be thought of by his human followers, the Muslims, as an enemy of theirs. So you ever met someone, any friend of yours is a friend of mine. Vice versa. Any enemy of Allah's is an enemy of mine. This includes people who willingly reject Islam, but also people who've never heard of Islam. They're an enemy without regard. And others besides them that you know not. Allah knows them. So when you go out in the name of Allah to kill people, enemies of Allah, non-Muslims, if you will, there's some that you are aware of. You know people in that crowd are non-Muslims for sure. But there exists this possibility that with whatever bomb or whatever you use, you're going to hit one of the enemies of Allah or the non-Muslims of which you're not aware. You didn't know they exist. It's a nice little bonus. I was shooting for Jimmy on the corner, but Billy on the corner is also a non-Muslim, and he might get hit too, and what a great bonus. I went for 25 points, and I got 50 points, like a video game. And whatever you expend in the way of God, so, again, the way of Allah, killing non-Muslims is called the way of Allah. What is the way of Allah? Slitting throats for Allah, in the advancement of Islam. That's pretty sick in and of itself, but if you don't think Islam has been involved in attacks against America, I hope you're paying attention. Whatever financial sacrifices you make or other sacrifices that you make in this way of Allah, this act of murder to advance Islam, shall be repaid to you in full. So whatever you lose on this side of the grave, in the killing spree, in the bloodbath to advance Islam, you're going to get rewarded on the other side of the grave in Allah's heaven. And I have an entire appendix on Allah's heaven, and it's one sick, orgy, drunken, disgusting thing. But that's what the Muslims working towards. Can't wait to get with the whores on the couches and have alcohol in the rivers. That's wonderful. You will not be wronged. So the idea is that the stunt that you're getting set to pull off in the name of Allah, it's going to go smoothly. It's not going to fail no matter what. Even if the regular people see it, oh, the bomb didn't go off properly. It doesn't matter because you will not be wronged. It's not going to fail. It's an illusion of invincibility. It's a delusion of grandeur offered to the Muslim who decides, yes, I'm getting set to do this great work for Allah. So the great psychological and emotional condition that hypes you up just by believing, hey, nothing's going to go wrong because Allah's running the whole thing. All right? So the Muslim terrorist who studies this verse right before he hijacks a plane, right before he bombs an office building, has these verses that we just looked at ringing in his head throughout the day as he's walking around, getting ready, you know, buying a coconut or whatever on the street, you know, saying hello to everyone. In his mind, he's got these verses giving him the motivation to do what has to be done. Fully believing, hey, I'm going to be unstoppable. You know, it's like the Blues Brothers. We're on a mission from God. We're on a mission from Allah. You know what I mean? So what kind of human being, what kind of human agency can prevent the will of Allah from taking place, right? He believes that he's doing the work of the Creator. He's energized, he's psyched up, he's hyped up to get the job done. There's no fear of failure. There's no feelings about potential consequences in their mind, in their heart. Nothing is going to sway them from their desire to carry it out. And when someone has that mentality, disaster has always been the result since the first day Islam was on the scene. So that was just a few select verses from Surah 8. This is the flow of the entire book of the Quran. This is in line with the historical record as recorded in the Hadith, Sahih al-Bukhari and al-Muslim. Again, Christianity, when Peter took out his sword, Jesus said, put the sword away. My kingdom's not going to be won this way. Muhammad said, take out the sword because Allah's kingdom is going to be won this way. When someone says, hey, these are the same God. No, they're not. Find me a passage where the Christian church is commanded to rob, loot, rape, burn, slit throats in the name of Jesus. It's not commanded. Well, but I read about the Crusades and I saw this documentary on A&E. Don't you know? What a bunch of Roman Catholics did in a war in response to Muslims taking over Jerusalem and them trying to free Jerusalem from Islamic occupation has no logical relationship to the evangelism and advancement of the gospel of Jesus Christ. They're not the same thing. One's a political thing. The Crusades were they were ordered by politicians and they were executed by and fleshed out and lived out by mercenaries, military people. You know what I mean? So that's not the same thing at all. There's a difference between a professing Christian hurting people in opposition to the Bible versus a Muslim hurting people in obedience to the Quran and in looking up to and trying to emulate the life and practice of their so-called prophet. So I hope that answers that question.